Ready to learn about the latest and greatest in insect detection technology? This is Talk Ag to Me. Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, a podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brendan Black, and it has been a while. So I had to take a little bit of a break from recording just because I was finishing up my last semester of student teaching, but we are back and better than ever. We have a few life updates that we'll get into another time. But for right now, I have an episode that I've had in the chamber for quite some time now that I just really haven't had the time to get out. But I'm so excited for you guys to hear. I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Hickle, who is with FarmSense, a company that produces insect detection technology. And so Dr. Hickle is going to talk a little bit about this cool piece of technology that they produce that has the ability basically to detect the level of insects in a particular field, farm, orchard, whatever environment you decide to put it in. There's a lot more complexity to it than that, but we talk a lot about the evolution of technology overall, talk about the evolution of insect management in agriculture and how to properly manage pests. And it's just a really cool episode, very traditional Talk Academy episode like we would have way back in the day. So hope you guys enjoy it. Make sure that you share it around with all your friends and family, and not just online but offline as well, around the dinner table, all those different things that we like to share here on the podcast. So I look forward to catching up with you guys again real soon on everything. But in the meantime, look forward to checking out the episode. So here we go. Okay, so if you could start off just by introducing yourself, talking a little bit about why you're here today, what you're here to talk about, and then we can jump into the questions.
Hi, Brandon. Yeah, I'm Leslie Hickle. I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called FarmSense. I am a card-carrying entomologist, pesticide toxicologist by training, and have spent much of my career in ag, tech, or animal health. I just enjoy being out there, maybe getting dirty, seeing green, fins, fur, hooves, things like that. And I met my co-founders at a proof of concept meeting at UC Riverside. And they are computer scientists. And they thought, why not bring the power of computation to solve problems in entomology? And I saw this device, and a version of it sits behind me, and it's electronic. It replaces the terrible sticky trap that we've all grown up with in agriculture. I don't know if you know them, but they're these little delta-shaped devices that hang from trees that have stick-on boards in it, and people drive hundreds of thousands of miles checking these cards and looking at dead insects. And we made these beautiful models of population development in grad school using these sticky traps, but they're not that good because they're always delayed, right? You get the data 7 to 10 or days behind, and sometimes it's not even real data, it's made up. So there's always this question of what's really happening in the field. And this device is electronic. It literally is an electronic curtain, an LED curtain that the insect flies through. And it works 24/7. You hang it in the tree, you put the same lures in it, and it can actually classify and count the insects that are flying. And it
Wow.
sends the data to your phone, or it sends it to your laptop. The processing goes a little bit on board and in the cloud. So we have these advanced algorithms that can actually tell you, is it a peach twig borer? Is it a navel orange worm? Is it an oriental fruit moth? Or all three? So in essence, we're replacing the labor that's involved with monitoring, but at the same time, we're harnessing the power of AI, right? We're giving the grower a picture of what's happening in their field today. It allows us to then predict what's going to happen. No more guesswork, right? Should I spray? Should I not spray? Can I use these other options? And the best thing about it, it allows us to build prescription options. And it's linked to the value of the crop. So let's say in almonds, because that's what we've been spending most of our time in, you have an insect that has 2, maybe 3 generations a year. It has a different impact on each stage of the plant. And you can then go and say, okay, the price of almonds is going to be $2.40 a pound. I'm going to protect as much crop as I can.
Mhm.
Or the price of almonds might not be so nice. It could be $1 a pound, God forbid, right? $1 a pound. So you would make different decisions. And that's what I think we're doing is we're harnessing computer science AI and machine learning and entomology and packaging it in something that a grower or a pest management advisor or farm manager can use to make better decisions. We're,
Yeah,
does that
very.
make sense?
Yeah, definitely. No, that sounds awesome. I'd like to break that into a few different parts. So we on this podcast cover a lot of different types of agricultural technology. A lot of it focuses on that precision ag kind of criteria technology, a lot more sensory based, a lot more monitoring based, technology. So I'd like to dive into that a little bit. But before I do, I thought it was kind of interesting. We talked a little bit about before starting the recording here that I actually am going through my student teaching right now. I'm teaching high school agriculture, and one of the classes I'm teaching is plant and soil science, and our current unit that we're in is IPM. We're talking about how to develop an IPM plan, how to monitor for pests, and how to identify different types of pests, and insects and weeds and diseases and all those sorts of things. And so it's kind of cool seeing this technology being put into use because this is the exact type of thing that I'm talking to my students about. They're currently developing, plans on how to monitor, population of pests, action thresholds, economic injury level, that sort of thing. I guess kind of my first question with that is, does this device, so you mentioned that it monitors what pests are coming through. Does it determine things like population level and action threshold and all that, or is it just the raw data and then the producer determines the rest of it?
Oh, no, no, no. So our goal is to provide the producer with all the information,
Hmm.
right? We have the ability. My co-founders, one of them was just awarded the IEEE medal in and acknowledges the father of entomological computational entomology,
Hmm. Wow.
right? He's like one of the top computer scientists in the world in these time series analysis. And my second co-founder is also an AI person, but also he's a wireless communication and database person. So our goal is to do exactly what you said, Brandon. I studied this in graduate school. That's the irony to me of this, is that we've gone my whole career, and when I started participating in mentoring students and faculty at UC Riverside, my alma mater, I thought, wow, we still haven't solved this problem. We're still using sticky traps and we're still guessing, and we could get away with guessing. So my major prof was actually one of the fathers of IPM.
Hmm.
And my
Wow.
two colleagues are both IPM people. Cliff is out of Ken Hagen's lab at UC Berkeley. So he's been a practicing PCA for a couple decades, several decades. And his interest is, of course, parasites and biocontrol. We were all weaned on this.
Huh.
We had the early successes of red scale, right? And the parasites coming in, which is no longer good because now we have Asian citrusillid and
Hmm.
HLP. So everything is in flux in agriculture. But that's the idea, Brandon. The idea is good. I think what they added to IPM is they're not calling it SPM because they recognize it's sustainable pest management.
Hmm.
They recognize the need for area-wide programs.
Hmm.
So that is another leg of the IPM
Hmm.
basis that will make it more, I think, tractable, reachable.
Interesting. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, with a lot of the newer technology coming out, a lot of that big push is for sustainability and for it to be able to be integrated in a way that makes it more cohesive with the rest of the farm, right? So that
Yes.
that definitely makes a lot of sense that they're making that push and that movement towards that new type of terminology. So that kind of leads into another question of mine, though. So this technology is very big on sensory and constant updating of the producer and the pest control manager and that sort of thing. So how does it work with other, ag tech or ag can't talk today, precision ag technology or other forms of, sensory data that may be going on in the farm? Is there any compatibility there, or is it kind of just its own independent program?
It's they're all codependent. When
Okay.
you think about it, the grower has to deal with what we call variable inputs,
Hmm.
right? He's got fixed assets, the farm's there, the tree's there, the labor can be there or not, and equipment. But what makes or breaks their profitability is how well they manage pests, disease, water, and nutrients, right? And it turns out that all of those have an impact on your pest populations. For instance, you've seen stressed orchards.
Hmm.
Stressed orchards have a different pest complex than healthy orchards, right?
Oh yeah.
They have a different, we're working with water companies, those that measure water in the soil, those that measure the health of the tree through dendrometers. We're looking at nutrition because it all affects the pest development.
Hmm. Huh.
And
Interesting.
also the grower, when he or she doesn't solve one problem at a time.
Right.
Right. So if they're looking at, they're got to make an insect pest spray, they have to make a disease pest spray, they have to apply a foliar nutrient. They're not going to be running the equipment down for three separate sprays, maybe, right? So that's what I think AI also allows you to do is you get a picture, a more holistic picture with these autonomous devices.
Hmm.
And then you're going to be using robots, right, to put the applications out at the right time of the day or the year or the stage of the crop.
Hmm.
So we're codependent, and this industry is moving in that direction. There's going to be an integration and consolidation of these tools.
Cool. Yeah, no, I like that idea a lot. That sounds really cool to have a fully, there's kind of this fear of fully automated farm. I see a lot of potential for it though. It's not so much something that we need to, be afraid of as much as it is something we can look forward to as something that can help us more easily access and produce, all the products that we're working on the farm nowadays. So I had another question for you that was kind of started to lead into something you said earlier. So you mentioned that this device, it works very closely with like your PCAs and your farm managers and that sort of thing. However, you did say that it minimizes or even eliminates certain parts of labor. So having to go in and check all the sticky traps and all that kind of thing. So in terms of minimizing that labor, that's a concern that's going on with a lot of this sensory technology. I've even had guests on the show before that have talked about this technology and saying that they're worried about how much it's going to remove people from their jobs. And now I think you and I both realize that there's a lot more jobs to fill in agriculture than there are currently jobs being filled. So we have a disparity in people. We have a disparity in the labor force anyways. So I see this as a great advantage. But could you talk a little bit about how it goes into how this technology can go into replacing some of that labor and how that replacement of labor actually is more beneficial to the farmer than it would be harmful.
Well, when you think about it, what is the level of labor that is used to drive the truck around and check the sticky traps?
Yeah.
And those are often summer interns.
Hmm.
Uh, and we figured we'd put them maybe over 700 out of a job just in nuts alone, okay,
Mm.
because of the acreage. But we think that those individuals might like a better paying, more intellectually stimulating job and maybe get involved in AI and machine learning and ag engineering and wireless, or, some of the things that we are dealing with as issues in ag.
Mm.
So we look at it as a positive for improving the job opportunities for people who formerly drove trucks around in the summer. The second thing is, I think it opens up a whole new field of people using the information from these pest or disease or nutrient sensors to think about how to solve those problems,
Mm.
right? Not react, but maybe prepare and not actually and come up with solutions.
Mm.
So we look at labor as a yes, we're dealing with a shortage of it. We have a shortage of it. We can't find certain skilled people for our company,
Mm.
right? They're just not going into the ag sciences for one thing, or even engineering. But we do find people who are interested in data, analyzing data, coming up with predictive algorithms, maybe solutions, and that's what we're looking for. So I think the labor issue is true. I think you're going to have to consolidate information coming in.
Mm.
So it's more understandable to the grower. They don't
Mm.
want to know. We found out we're all scientists. Between entomology and computer science, we love lots of data,
Mhm.
right? Lots of bugs, lots of data.
Right.
But it turns out that growers don't care about data. They just want to know what their population's doing. Is it approaching a damaging level? If it's
Mhm.
approaching a level, what can they use to mitigate it?
Mm.
And then what are the predictive outcomes? If you use this compound, the probability of success is 90%, right? If you
Mm.
this compound, the probability of success is maybe 80%. And that's where we really need to pay attention because the pesticides, the biopesticides replacing the formerly broad spectrum ones
Mhm.
are much more challenging to use. So I
Mm.
am an organophosphate chemist, carbamate chemist. I was weaned on all those old compounds, right?
Yeah.
I worked for one of the large ag companies out of my postdoc. And the new compounds coming along, I can tell you, are much more challenging to use. And it's not, before you could spray, you had plus or minus 2 weeks. It didn't matter what
Yeah.
stage was out there, it killed everything, right?
Yeah.
But now we have egg specific, larvae specific, we have stage, tree stage, we have all of these tools, even pheromones. So one of the things we found is moths, the navel orangeworm flies at a particular time of night.
Mm.
So if they're flying in that window, why do you puff all night long, right? You can just puff when the insects are there. Every insect has its own periodicity.
Hmm.
So now instead of sitting in the field 20, all night like every entomologist eventually does as part of their training, you can just put
Right.
one of these devices out. I don't know if you've ever done that, Brendan. Have you sat
Uh,
in the field all night and watched insect behavior?
I haven't had the opportunity to yet. I honestly wouldn't mind. I think it'd be kind of interesting, but I wouldn't want to make a career out of it, I guess I would say. But
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I don't think it would be a good career path.
Yeah, but no, that's really interesting. I had while you were talking there, I came up with a couple other ideas here that I'll kind of get into in a minute. But I wanted to go back to something you had mentioned a little bit earlier. So you talked about how, in terms of replacing or minimizing necessary labor, there you talked about how you're having like your summer interns or something, someone that's just driving the tractor, checking the traps. Now that they don't need to do that, there's now a an opportunity for kind of like a higher expectation in terms of their skill development, right? So
Yes,
this technology would allow them to, like you mentioned, be a little bit more like more heavily trained in in understanding the data side of it, understanding the computational side of it, understanding the computer science and even the entomology side of it a little bit more effectively. And that's one of the advantages that I actually, kind of promote a lot on the show whenever people talk about the scare of, automated technology replacing jobs. But we throughout the entire history of agriculture, as technology has advanced, our jobs have advanced. We haven't always had the tractor, but when we did have the tractor, now we have all these jobs that are built around the tractor. We have tractor mechanics, we have tractor operators, we have tractor, now we have computer scientists specifically for tractor design and GPSing and all that sort of thing. So as technology advances, the jobs advance as well. And so that's one of the advantages that I see from this is that like you mentioned, the interns and the people who are being paid to just check these traps, now they're going to be given the opportunity to learn new skills that are going to be necessary for other parts of their potential job if they go into entomology or plant science or any of those similar related fields that have to do with this kind of stuff. So that's really cool to me.
absolutely. Absolutely right, Brennan. And people say we've gone from the agrarian age to the industrial age to the information age,
Yeah.
but it's overwhelming. That's
Mhm.
the challenge that we have. The information is overwhelming and it's not always right,
Mm.
right? And that's
Yeah.
the challenge of AI too, because it can make it look real. We don't, we have a lot of journals now that are not peer reviewed. So the data out there that's presented could be a little more questionable. So now instead of finding good data, which was hard in, a few years back, now you're plowing through reams of data and it's harder to find the real good stuff.
Right.
It's got its own challenges. It's almost too much information that's unfiltered.
Yeah. No, and that's I mean that's kind of the curse and blessing that comes with, things like, like the internet and like having that infinite source of information is just
Yes.
how do you sift through all of it and how do you know what to trust, right?
Yep.
No, exactly. That actually does kind of relate to something that I was wanting to get into a little bit. So, and this may be something that I'm just unfamiliar with because I'm not a entomologist. I just, study as a hobby, but it's not my main field of study. So my main field is ag education and ag literacy. So, maybe this is something that I'm not aware of. But in terms of like how this technology knows, what pests are going through it. Do you guys have like a pest database that it feeds from, or kind of what's the programming that it uses to identify the different pests that are going through
We
it?
use when it flies through this, it
Mhm.
creates a wing beat frequency pulse.
Oh,
It's
wow.
sort of a pseudo-acoustic pulse.
Hmm.
And it turns out that those pulses are characteristic of each species.
Hmm.
It's like their
Interesting.
own fingerprint. And so we can train this device in a lab, in a flight tunnel with lab species, or in the field, we could put the lure, a specific lure in there, and we put a camera on it also. And you see this little light here.
Hmm.
The camera sees when the insect flies through. It knows it's a signal from that insect.
Oh,
So
wow.
the key with this particular device is to have a lure. And we are using pheromone lures right now.
Hmm.
In the future, there's all sorts of lures insect use. They use color, they use sound, right? You
Hmm.
just need to bring them to the device. So once you have that signal, then you know the signal from peach twig borer doesn't look anything like the signal from navel orangeworm. And also, this device carries its own temperature and humidity.
Hmm.
So that signal changes with temperature and humidity because the insect flights here. I mean, there's amazing stuff you can do with all of this data. And
Wow.
it's pretty sophisticated. I have to admit, when I first met Shalinder and Amen, I thought the Internet of Things was everything. I didn't realize it was specific. So I'm learning a whole new lexicon, and they're using one because to me, a bug has 3 body parts and 6 legs, right? It's
Sure.
it's not a little glitch in the software.
Hmm.
And in fact, I think what we're finding is the insect side is sometimes easier than the software side or the AI side. But the
Wow.
other thing I wanted to mention is that we see that in some ways, the early IPM people were looking at basics,
Hmm.
right? And we forgot about basics because we had cheap pesticides and we're going after this green revolution,
Hmm.
which was spray everything.
Right.
So now when you go back to basics, you actually have to pay attention to things like sanitation, right? And pest monitoring. And they're not so glitzy or snazzy. So people don't really get it.
Hmm.
They just want to spray again. We're
Right.
thinking that these biopesticides are going to be drop-in solutions, and they're not. They are not. And
Yeah.
having worked for one of the early bioag companies, Mycogen, we developed the first BTs, which
Hmm.
were expressed in a foreign host. We saw resistance develop very quickly. So they're not also going to be immune to resistance development. The
Hmm.
insect genome is extremely plastic. You're never bored. We've got resistance, we've got invasive species. It's also a reason why people are going to have to spend time in the field.
Hmm. Yeah.
AI is not going to replace eyes that are seeing damage from an exotic species, for instance, right?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I was trying to figure out as you were talking about this. So in the case that something, foreign to the field does enter and the system isn't, prepared for it, how does it compute that data? Does it
It
identify as an
doesn't.
unknown? Okay.
So the device is only as good as the lures that we have.
Okay.
We are not replacing PCAs or farm managers. We still need people paying attention to what's happening on the farm.
Mm.
It's, I explained it to some of my Silicon Valley friends that you can't debug in an air-conditioned office. You have to get dirty. You have to be out in the field and observe because pests, they're mobile. We
Mm.
import them, we export them also. I mean, we've got some Native American pests that are now the Colorado potato beetle infests almost all potato growing areas of the world.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Huh.
our rice water weevil, it's also
Mm.
in all major rice growing areas of the world. So
Wow.
we're a global economy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So I'm going to get a little bit more technical on the entomology part now.
sure.
When it's analyzing and and determining what pests are coming through, so it's let's just say that it's monitoring a larger population of like you mentioned some different like wing beat patterns of different insects and that sort of thing. So if it's detecting larger populations of adults of a particular species of insect, can it then, identify what the likelihood is of a population of like the larva and eggs and pupa of that stage as
Yes,
well? Or
that's exactly it, Brandon. So now you know. Okay, I'm going to use 2 insects because we've got most data on peach twig borer and navel orangeworm.
okay.
So navel orangeworm occurs. in fewer numbers naturally than peach twig borer.
Mm.
They occur at different times of the year. Peach twig borer has a different economic injury level.
Mm.
So you're plotting both insects. You're plotting the population curve day degrees, right? You know when 80, 90% of the population, especially the first generation, is in this window. You know when they're laying eggs. If you use an egg trap for navel orangeworm, that's even more precise.
Mm.
So now you can predict when 80, 90% of the eggs are out there and use an ovicide,
Mm.
right? If you wait later, they're laying there, they have a different laying behavior. But so now you can start to say, I can use an ovicide, and it really helps not only the small growers who can mobilize their equipment and spray,
Mm.
but it helps the larger growers. Let's say you've got 20,000 acres. There's no way you can spray one material on 20,000 acres that is a larvicide, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You might have to use an ovicide, a larvicide, a pheromone disruption, adulticide, an RNAi inhibitor, whatever.
Mm.
But now you can at least time it and treat more effectively. No more chlorpyrifos or all of these compounds that are pyrethroids, especially. We still have some.
Mm.
I met the guy, Sir Michael Elliott, who created the first photostable pyrethroids.
Oh,
And
wow.
from going from under, just hours of residual to weeks of residual and grams per acre. I did my research on Imperial Valley cotton, and
Okay.
cotton was king. And when we started, we were spraying cotton 26 times a season
Wow.
because cotton was so valuable. And we thought we had to protect all the blooms, all the squares, all the bolls, everything, right?
Mm.
And it was a group of my major prof and two other major profs groups. Harry Shorey was one of them.
Mm.
He was one of the leaders in pheromone research. Pink bollworm pheromone was. So by the end of that, and when all these grad students and professors had finished their research, two things happened. One was we were down to 6 sprays a season, and 3 of them were pheromone sprays,
Oh,
which
wow.
is amazing.
Yeah.
But the other thing is we realized that we needed an area-wide program.
Mm.
And then what happened is they decided, so I postdoced at the pink bollworm APHIS lab in Phoenix, and we started to work on an area-wide eradication program
Mm.
because it wasn't, pink bollworm is a devastating pest, but
Mm.
fortunately very host specific. So that's why we're a real supporter of the sustainable IPM push, because insects don't care if it's your field or my field.
Yeah, right.
And some of them don't even care if it's pistachios or almonds. They're perfectly happy on both.
Mm.
And we think area-wide programs are a really good way. It should be a foundation of any pest management, integrated pest management. Actually, you're in the Fresno area. There's a area-wide program, I think, going on up there for navel orangeworm.
I
And I
think I've
think
heard
there's
about that.
another one
Yeah.
in Modesto as well.
Yeah. 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 I have heard a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've actually more recently moved down to the Tulare Visalia area, but I still
Okay.
go up to Fresno quite a bit. I have a lot of connections up there. So, yeah,
Yep.
they tell me about that sort of thing quite a bit. So,
Yeah.
that's interesting. So, how does all that work with, in terms of like compliance with new regulations for certain types of pesticides? Like, does that, I'm not sure if your technology has anything to do with that or if that's more of a farm management side of things
No,
or,
we don't recommend pesticides. We would like people to use the ones we have more effectively,
yeah, that makes
right?
sense.
But when you think about it, if you can time your populations more precisely, you can now contemplate things like parasites and
Hmm.
predators and entomopathic, pathogenic fungi or bacteria, right? Which
Yeah.
have a more precise. So now we can start using some of these other tools
Mm.
besides sprays. And the problem too, I think, with some of these biopesticides is, yeah, it's a accelerated path through the regulatory channel, but it's not a bad thing to take more time to evaluate your product's performance in the field, which is what the traditional pesticide companies do.
Hmm.
That's why we know the precise rate, the precise timing, the precise formulation for every circumstance. Because they had this long regulatory path and they were conducting field studies the whole time on efficacy in the field. And
Yeah.
early on, the EPA says, we're not an efficacy proving company or agency. The market will do that.
Mm.
They're primarily looking at safety,
Yeah, that makes
right?
sense. Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword, I think, for some of these biopesticide developers. Yeah, I can get it through sooner, but my product's harder to use. How am I going to time it? Is that formulation really the right? They don't spend or need because regulatory doesn't require it.
Mm.
So it's I've run 3 natural product screening programs in my career, so I know how challenging they are to first find today because we keep rediscovering the same ones, but also then to formulate them and apply them so they work effectively.
Yeah, that makes sense. I realized as we're going through this, we've been throwing around a lot of terminology that you and I understand, but I'm realizing that some of my audience may not be as familiar with. So could we like take a step back and go back to basics a little bit and describe things like like economic injury level, action threshold, like some of those terms that are relevant to what we're talking about, but maybe are not quite as clear for some of the people who maybe don't have this kind of background.
Sure. So it all gets down to the fact that a grower needs to make money.
Mm,
At the end of the day, we do provide food for the world, but it has to be in a way that the grower can make some money also. And they'll treat if they believe that they can make money.
mm,
And and the precision in treatment, if you can time it more precisely, you can make more money.
right.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Very simple. And that's why we're always looking, you have to link it to the price of the commodity.
Mm,
I mean, there's a huge exchange out there for commodities, right?
right.
Corn and beans, the 11 big commodities that are traded on the stock exchange. And they're betting literally on the come.
Hmm.
Are they going to make money? Aren't they going to make money? And how much money? How much is a bushel of corn? How much is a bushel of beans? We don't have quite that liquidity in the specialty crops, which California has. So I think we have between, what is it, 350 and 400 specialty crops in this state?
Yeah, I think it's closer to 400 now, but yeah, it's around
Yeah.
that area.
And we produce about 80%. I think we have 80% of the nation's specialty acreage.
Yeah.
So our crops are smaller acreage, but higher value per acre. So we tend to pay a little bit more attention to them because we have a lot more invested.
Mm,
Our trees need to last, what is it, 25 years or so, depending on the variety, whereas corn and beans you plant every year and
yeah.
wheat and these annual crops. So it all comes down to helping the grower understand that their populations are developing to such a point that they are going to see some damage if they don't treat.
Mm,
And that's an economic threshold, right? And the injury and threshold level are fluid, I think. So, and that's when you have to decide based on the outcome, right? Are you going to make money with this treatment? Because it's going to cost you $100 or $80, however much it is to treat per acre. That is
right.
per acre, right? So I think what is it, $40 per acre now? I'm not, every crop is different based
Right.
on the equipment and the product and what they're using, but it's not trivial to mobilize all the equipment, the labor to treat, and then buy the pesticide and the water adjuvants to make whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably the best way to put it in terms of, helping people understand the why of all of this, because I like there's people out there who don't have an idea as to why we do pest control other than, they don't like that there's bugs eating their fruit, that sort of thing. But like, realizing the economic impact that it's having on both the producer and the consumer, because, if there's an abundance of pests impacting, fruit production or general crop production, it's going to impact, the short, food shortages and the ability to get food and the pricing of food and all those different things are impacted by our ability to, monitor and control the pests that we have in our fields. A lot of people don't quite get that
The
part of it.
consumer also has a responsibility
Yeah,
because consumer wants a perfect product, right?
true. Yeah.
They don't want a head of lettuce with one hole in it. And then the insect's long gone. There's nothing left, but there's one little hole from when it fed. Or they don't want an orange or a peach that's smiling at, the cap facing damage on these fruit. The fruit is perfectly good. It just means that maybe thrips were there early on, during. So we also have to educate the consumer that these are perfectly good produce.
Hmm.
They're healthy, they're produced right, they have a little bit of cosmetic damage, but And they get marked down substantially. When you miss your timing, though, so this year you've heard about the average industry damage level in almonds was very high. It was like
Yeah.
8% industry wide. And
Yeah.
some growers had as high as 20%. When
Wow.
you have that kind of damage, you're not making any money. They completely mistimed it. But we also had really strange weather patterns. You live up
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
right?
No,
And
it's been weird over here.
that's where we are learning with AI, with these new algorithms, looking at both crop phenology and insect pest population phenology
Mhm.
and how the two interrelate. We're going to be better at predicting this kind of damage in the future.
Mm.
You just need to take literally years of data. We only get one bite of the apple every year, right?
Right.
So you have to, it takes a long time to develop this kind of data, but we will get there. We have the ability to do that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. That actually kind of leads into one of the last couple questions that I have here. Just talking a little bit about like the logistics of your, the business side of this a little bit. So how far have you guys spread in terms of getting this technology out there? Are you, mostly in California? Have you gotten, nationwide, worldwide? Are you just certain parts of California? Could you break that down a little bit for me?
We purposely focused on specialty crops, and
Okay.
we're lucky that it's in our backyard since
Mm.
we're a Riverside-based company, actually a spin out of UC Riverside. We have also stayed under the radar because I'm a person who likes to have a product that works before we start selling it.
Yeah.
And it took a while to actually field harden this device. It started out, Eamon had the idea 10 years ago, and it was the size of a toy dollhouse run
Mm.
by a car battery.
Oh,
So
wow.
we've come a long way with our new, what we call minis. And it needed to work, right? You can't have 25% of failure in the field.
Right.
Ag has a long memory. So we've been staying under the radar, improving the technology, field hardening the unit. We're actually manufacturing our commercial units now. We
Mm.
should get them in any day now. And that is a whole nother discussion, Brennan, overseas manufacturing. So much harder than bugs.
Right.
So we are going to be giving away and selling units this year
Wow.
in a limited fashion for navel orangeworm on California tree nuts. So primarily pistachios, almonds, and walnuts. And we have been working overseas in Europe. They have some exotic pests that are not exotic to them. They're exotic to us. We've
Mm.
eradicated them a few times here, but we're interested in Europe. Um, Insects are, as I said, global. So, China produces 40% of the world's apples.
Mm.
Poland produces 10%. We have a fairly large, we're like number 5 in the world, I think, in apple production in the US, but we all
Mm.
have the same pests, codling
Yeah.
moth.
Oh,
And so that's why also we want to test our devices overseas and in these production areas because we learn that insect, even though it's a pest on apples in all 3 areas, actually, wherever apples are grown, East South America as well,
hmm.
we can all learn and develop management systems together.
Yeah.
So we
Okay.
are contemplating selling overseas. We are I think in the stage of our company where we're looking for strategic partners to help us distribute, sell, and support these kinds of technology devices. So we have an ant sensor in development. Ants are a really good indicator of certain kinds of pests. We have a grant that's looking at a couple of insects like a gypsy moth and Japanese beetle. We don't
Mm.
have them here in California, but they're getting here, right? They're marching
Yeah.
across, coming west. And so we have a sensor that will detect both a beetle and a moth, which are really different flying insects.
Yeah.
Yep. Our
Okay.
idea is to also look at the beneficials. So
Mm.
there's some lures coming out for things like green lacewings, right?
Mm.
We want to have an idea of what the biodiversity in the field is. Because if you can delay, and this is what really derailed, I think, IPM programs, is the early pesticide sprays destroyed all the predators and parasites.
Mm.
And we saw that especially with the citrus models, right? And if you can release beneficials, give them a chance, they actually do a pretty good job. It's sort of this dynamic equilibrium is what I call it.
Yeah. Huh.
The actual and I learned that actually my major prof said this is how it exists in an agricultural system, that it changes, right? The equilibrium changes, but it's dynamic. And so what
Okay.
you need to do is characterize what are the upper and lower limits that
Mm.
are good for the grower, right? And also good for the crops. And that's what these models will also try and build in. You have those confidence intervals.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I think I have one more question for you. And then after that, you can add anything else I may not have hit on or anything else you wanted to touch on. But I think my last question for you is what have you seen in terms of feedback on this, from producers, from other researchers, what's been the general consensus on what this technology's been doing?
They love it. We have never solicited, they've come to us because of two things. One, labor, but two, they know they need to see things in real time.
Mm,
You need real-time data. The hard part is, so the people who have feet on the ground
mhm.
get it. They get it immediately because they've been hostage to sticky traps for decades. And hiring people to check those traps has been harder and harder every year.
Mm,
And it costs more and more every year. And it's a way, it's not that useful. You have an idea of what's happening, but yeah, plus or minus a week. A lot of things, insects are respond to the environment. The hotter it gets, the faster they develop. That's why
yeah.
you see those explosions in aphids and the early season pests, right? So we have seen an industry that really wants our units. Our challenge has been as a small startup company, one, COVID.
Mm.
COVID set us back 2 years.
Oh, wow.
You couldn't be in the field. They wouldn't meet you. The USDA wouldn't meet you. The University Extension people wouldn't meet you. Growers didn't want anybody on their farms. And so literally COVID set us back 2 years. And then the repercussions of COVID are still felt in the supply chain today. We are still experiencing supply chain issues that were triggered by COVID.
Wow.
Yes. So I would say that we are 2 years behind launching this because of COVID.
Mm.
And people want it. They were willing to buy it when we still had actually, in my opinion, too many problems in the field because the industry is hungry for these kind of devices.
Mm.
You see it mostly in the water sensors, right?
Hmm.
The the largest number of companies out there in the IoT space are all water sensor companies,
Hmm.
which has helped growers, I think, tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a lot. I mean, I know some farmers from my area that use a lot of those water sensors, and they say it
Yep,
makes a big difference in their farms.
huge
So,
difference. And
yeah,
so then the next challenge is, all right, the nutrition, nitrogen sensors still sort of very challenging technically.
sure.
Then you have the disease sensors, autonomous disease sensors, about 5 companies out there trying to develop those.
Mm.
And then you have the autonomous pest sensors. And, we've got how many millions of bugs? Fortunately, only several thousand are economic pests. but but we're going to be challenged for a while in developing appropriate sensors for all of them. And then when they occur in a complex, and
Mm.
then when like mites don't fly, right?
Yeah,
So, so on your students, when you take your students out to the field and you're talking about IPM because you're in IPM rich state, right?
yeah.
What's their biggest question? Is it how to sample or what factors to take into account? I'd like to learn from you at the same time.
Yeah, my students it took them a little bit to kind of start to find the interest in IPM. A lot of the, high school kids are not quite as eager to go out and catch bugs as I am, but once I kind of got them interested in it, they started to realize that there's a relationship between some of the living organisms out there. And so that's what really started to get them into it was, they realized that there are certain weeds that are attracting certain types of insects and that there are certain insects that are only there because their prey is there, and so being able to realize the relationship between some of those a decent amount of them understood the idea of beneficials versus pests, that, like honeybees are a good thing, whereas, like something like, like an aphid or like a thrip is something that is, negative that we don't want on the plant. I started to throw them off a little bit when we had some talks about some, pests and that can serve as beneficials, and vice versa. Some insects that serve dual roles, that they can be beneficial from the sake of taking out other pests, but they can also be a pest in terms of causing similar types of damage or even taking out other beneficials. And so understanding of the relationships of the entire ecosystem and how all that impacts, production and crop health and all of those things is what really got them interested in it. In terms of questions, they haven't had a ton that were very specific in terms of like pest management because we're still trying to get there. A lot of what we're doing right now is pest identification. So it's understanding the difference between a pest and a beneficial. It's understanding the life cycles and development of different insects. We just last week we covered our weeds section, so we're going over how weeds impact crops and how their growth patterns and different types of reproduction styles are what make them difficult to handle and all that. Next week we're going into diseases, and then we're going to IPM plan management, like how you actually develop the plan and how you go about determining things like action thresholds and economic injury levels and how you look at all of those things. We looked at all those different factors, like you mentioned, like what the temperature is, what the climate is, the current life cycle stage is for many of the pests that we'll see in our area, and how to plan accordingly for those sorts of things, and how to prescribe certain types of solutions for those things. So a lot of their questions and a lot of their interests have been around that kind of relationship. That's the part that has been kind of a challenge for them to understand. They get the
Mm.
idea that an insect is, has three body parts and it has, six legs and all those sorts of things. And they even I had a little activity where they had to build a bug, so they could create a completely new original species as long as it had, a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, and it had six legs and had antenna and it had wings of some sort, and they could be customizable with whatever they wanted to do, but they had to identify what the mouth parts are, what type of damage it would do, what kind of crop it would attack. So getting them kind of outside of their comfort zones and getting them to understand those things from a critical thinking perspective instead of just a general knowledge was kind of a challenge. But now that they're starting to get there, I think that implementing the actual IPM plan and having them develop those plans will be a lot easier because now they understand why it matters. What's the impact of all of this? It's not just what's an insect and what's a weed and what's a disease and all of that. It's why do we need to know the difference and how do those differences impact our ability to produce food?
Yeah. I think, and they live in an agricultural area. So if they get a wormy apple, I mean, it's immediate impact, right?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
yes, or a olive with a fly maggot in it. It's not very appetizing. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we have a garden right behind our classroom at the high school that I teach at, and so we'll take them out into the garden every once in a while, and we have plants back there, mostly succulents right now. So a lot of our pests include like spider mites and those sorts of things, and so we have them try to identify what pests they can find out there. I have them do a lot of observation walks and try to identify the pests that they see, and then I try to relate it to other pests that they know about. So like if they are involved in, like, we have like our citrus judging team. So if they're involved in citrus judging, then they're able to quickly identify things like thrips and katydid and grasshopper damage because they know what that looks like because they've identified it before. But when you're looking at things like spider mites, or if you're looking at aphids, or if you're looking at earwigs, a little bit of a different damage type than what they're used to. And so I'm trying to use that to compare it to what they know. Like you mentioned, they're in a very prevalent agricultural area, so they know some things, but it's a matter of relating it to other things they don't know and being able to apply what they do know to a practical industry perspective.
Yeah. I think it's kudos to you because we have to get kids from elementary, junior, and high school before they hit college to to go into the natural sciences again.
Hmm. I
And the
agree.
thing about entomology is you're never bored. You can
Yeah.
tell them they can travel the world and find an entomologist and be in awe of what these animals do. It's just an amazing. I actually wanted to be a race car driver and an engineer because my dad's an automotive engineer, and they wouldn't there were no curricula or schools that would accept women in engineering, which is how I became an entomologist.
Oh, wow.
And I've never looked back.
Huh.
It's just been a wonderful career for me, and I think we need more entomologists. We need more naturalists paying attention to the basics, right?
Yeah, for
We
sure.
can't solve everything with a spray or with AI.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a big thing that I try to push on them is, not just the career opportunities that are out there, but how agriculture is changing over time and how they need to be ready for, the new technological outcomes that are coming in, all the new, approaches towards a more sustainable methods of agriculture. We talked about regenerative agriculture a few weeks back and talking about how that handles pest control versus how more conventional agriculture handles pest control. So it's a lot of, it is a plant and soil science class, so we're covering all areas of plant and soil science. So we do talk about things like, the application of different types of sprays and more
Mhm.
conventional methods of agriculture. But
Yep.
I'm really trying to make a push towards what you were talking about, that more kind of, holistic understanding of how agricultural management can be. It doesn't have to just be spray, spray, spray all the time. There's a lot of different approaches to it. There's a lot of different techniques, and it's all dependent on what type of, what you're producing and where you're at and what your environment looks like, and
Yes.
what your financial ability is, and what your, like, if you have a pest control advisor, what their advice is, taking in all these factors and being able to identify that. And it's also, most of those kids aren't going to go on to become crop farmers, but that's not the point of it. The point of it is to have a more, like you mentioned, have a more educated consumer basis for them to go on and educate others and help them understand that everything that we're doing here is for the benefit of the consumer. It's for the production
Yes.
of food. It's for the, longevity of agricultural production as a whole.
Yep. You're absolutely right. And as you pointed out, I figure one of your previous guests pointed out, the average consumer is so far removed from
Hmm.
the source of the food. They have no idea what it takes to get that apple on the table or that nut or even the head of lettuce, right?
Yeah.
It's just, agriculture is fortunately a fairly sophisticated industry.
Yeah, it is. And
So I
that's,
think these new technologies are going to come out. We're right in this transition inflection point, I think.
yeah.
How do we use them?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that's we talked a little bit about your graduate research, earlier in the episode. My graduate research has actually been in that very topic of how do we connect people from outside of agriculture back to their roots? How do we help them understand agricultural production and, all the things that go into food production and the new technology coming out and all of that. So yeah, a lot of my research that actually, after we get done here, I have some more work to do on that graduate paper. It's done. I defended, but I have to do my corrections. But yeah, so all of my research and the whole point of this podcast I've been doing for the past 6 years is that exact goal of helping people understand, what their role is in all of this. It's not just you need to be educated about agriculture for the sake of being educated. It's you have an impact on agriculture more than anybody else beside maybe the farmer. The farmer and the consumer, they control everything about food production. So
Yep.
having that conversation with them. And that's why, I lost track now. I think I'm at 140, 150 episodes, something like that. And across those episodes, probably about 50%, maybe a little less than 50%, have been guests that don't come from agricultural backgrounds at all. Most of them come from big cities, or they come from other countries, or, they come from outside of agriculture. Then some of them never even been on a farm, never even seen a farm before. And they are all eager to come on because they have questions. They're curious about agriculture. They're interested in it. They're just so removed that they don't fully understand where to find that information. And so I've kind of served as that conduit, as as the bridge between the industry and the general consumer. But that's something that we need more of. We need more people out there having that conversation and connecting those
I
people.
can't wait to read what your dissertation says, because that's the biggest problem. The growers know what they need to do.
Hmm.
It's the consumers that, like you said, are half of the equation, right?
Yeah.
And that can help solve the problem, but they don't know how. They don't even know what the problems are. All they
No.
hear are the bad things about agriculture, but they don't hear about all of the food that's produced that's feeding them. So
Yeah.
a
And
little bit,
it's as much as, like you're saying, a lot of it is on them to, to understand this, but it's not even that they're doing it for malicious intent. They just don't know any better. They're not being told the accurate information. And so, like, I like to say there's a mutual responsibility. They have a responsibility to, to hear us out and to listen and to understand, but we also have a responsibility to provide accurate information and to have, conversations with them that are informative, but not, not what's the word I'm looking for? Like you're not talking down to them,
right,
condescending.
not judgmental.
Yeah, exactly. So there needs to be, kind of like we need to meet them halfway of sorts, and so that's what I'm trying to do is, is kind of lead that movement to meet them halfway. But I'm also
Yeah.
trying to tell them that we're doing that so that way they need to do the same thing.
Are there other initiatives at the high school level? You're teaching high school, right?
Yes, yeah.
Are there other initiatives at the high school level, at least in California, that are seeking to educate their students about agriculture and production and food
So
security, things like that?
so I'm sure you're familiar with FFA. So that's kind of the main driver of agricultural education in California. It's the main driver of agricultural education in the United States. It's the largest youth leadership organization in the country. It's, largest agricultural education organization in the country, but it's not the only one. So FFA is kind of the biggest driving force for high schools. That's kind of what my role is in high school. Is not only am I an agriculture teacher, but I'm also an FFA advisor. But besides just the high school level, there's a lot of initiatives for younger kids, for people outside of agriculture, from like the adult perspective. So we have like National Ag in the Classroom is a big one. They have a basically a national organization dedicated to just curriculum development and program development for the purposes of getting people involved in agriculture at all educational levels. But they mostly focus on the younger kids, like the K through 8 level. They do have some high school things as well, though. We have our local farm bureaus are very, very heavily involved in educating mostly high school kids, but they also focus on the general public. Where my research has been mostly is in educating the adult public. So we have a big push for educating in the classrooms about agriculture, but a very, very small minority of us are pushing for educating people outside of the classroom, who never had the opportunity to learn about it in high school or middle school or elementary school, who maybe didn't go through an FFA program, or who didn't go through 4-H, or weren't part of the Farm Bureau, or maybe they grew up in LA or New York, or somewhere that doesn't have as much agriculture readily available, and so they weren't able to get that exposure. And so that's kind of during my research, I found probably close to 500 different articles, all dedicated to ag education and agricultural literacy, and about 14 of those had anything to do with adults. Everything else was education based. It was all teachers, and there's a few with like legislators and that sort of thing. But even then, there's I think only 2 or 3 that I found that had anything to do with legislators, and about 14 in total that had to do with general consumers outside of the educational sphere. So
Mhm.
my area of research is very, very heavily under researched. I'm kind of, one of the few that's actually doing work in this area. But in terms of agricultural education and initiatives for getting people more involved in agriculture on the educational level, that's been pretty heavily, there's a decent amount of attention towards that area, and it's continuing to grow.
Yeah. And I think too with TikTok and some of these other social media, you see more of the younger generation living on farms trying to get the message out too. It's pretty
Yeah.
interesting to see some of those,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
exciting. But a lot of kids in cities are on video games. I don't think they're playing ag video games.
No, not very many. That's actually one of the initiatives that I was trying to push with this podcast for a little while. I did some episodes on different movies and video games and how they relate to agriculture. So trying to bridge that connection at their interest point. So like I
Yeah.
did an episode on Minecraft. I did an episode on Stardew Valley. I've done some episodes on movies like Wall-E and The Good Dinosaur and The Martian. Tried to cover popular movies that and video games that people of especially like the younger ages tend to really enjoy, but show them that it's not just a fun game. There's actually an educational component to it, and it relates to real life things we're doing. And
Yeah.
so it was kind of my half like half a brain approach at trying to connect with them and help them understand that there's more to life than just what's on their screen, but also what's on their screen can relate to what's going on outside of
Yeah.
outside of their door as well.
Yeah. See,
So
ag and bugs. Never boring.
yeah,
There's
no,
always
exactly.
stuff to do. Yeah.
Exactly. So, well, that wraps up all the questions I have. Is there anything else about FarmSense that I did not get to you'd like to share?
I think we're a very collaborative company.
Hmm.
We want people to monitor. We don't want to put those barriers in place. We want people to monitor and be more aware of their pests in the field. And like you said, they're not pests all the time, right? If they're
Hmm.
not causing damage. Nature fills all these niches for a reason. And man is the one who makes these demands on her. So
Hmm.
I think also that we're a very progressive company, that we believe in that there is a future for using these kinds of devices, but also for developing people who are thinking more holistically, as we mentioned, about
Hmm.
the farm and truly a sustainable green revolution. The green revolution came about for a couple reasons, but was not sustainable, right?
Right.
Because it depended so heavily on pesticides and to solve some of these pest problems. We need to think more long term and use these because it's going to happen. That's the whole idea, Brandon. Exactly what you're doing. We need farmers to think differently
Hmm.
because they are going to be doing things differently, and that's what we're striving for.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can definitely get on board with that message. That's like you said, very closely aligns with a lot of what I'm doing here. So that's awesome. Well, is there anything promotionally that you'd like to share? Anything, like a
Just
website or
contact us. Oh,
anything?
if you read our blogs, we also have a huge educational bent to our
Cool.
blogs. We purposely wanted to educate the general
Mm,
experts. They're written for the layman, the general public. We wanted them to understand the history of how IPM came,
mm.
what the issues are. Uh, we've written blogs about all sorts of stuff, but we have a huge educational component to what we do. Part of it is because new technology requires that, but it's also part because, like you, we felt that people just don't understand where their food is coming from.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I'll
And so we're always
definitely.
looking for topic. I'm going to put a pitch in. We're always looking for topics to put on it. We just found out we were Google's #1 featured snippet on farm pest management, which is
Wow.
pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So people are reading it and reposting. We're trying to, as I said, we want to work with everybody. We want people to monitor.
Hmm.
Just monitor. Just don't spray all the time. I grew up with that philosophy. It doesn't work. It's not a
Yeah.
long-term solution.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I fully support that. So yeah, I'll put the link down to your blog and everything down to the description below so you guys, all the audience members can check that out and hopefully learn a few more things than what they learned today. Hopefully they learned
Yeah.
quite a bit today, but yeah, no, that'd be awesome.
I
Um
want to thank you, Brandon, for giving us the time to get our message out. And I want to thank you also for doing what you're doing because I learned from you as well. And, we need to mobilize all of these
mhm.
activities to feed the world in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you as well, Dr. Hickle. I appreciate you taking the time. It's always a pleasure to have, more people on here that can bring some interesting things I haven't heard of or that, the audience hasn't heard of. So that's always a pleasure. So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. It's been a pleasure. And there you have it. That is the interview with Dr. Hickle. Thank you once again, Dr. Hickle, and for joining me for this interview, for teaching me all about your new technology over at FarmSense. If you guys would like to learn more about FarmSense, you can go to farmsense.org. I'll put the link down in the description for that. Once again, I apologize for this episode taking so long to get out and for it being so long since I last produced an episode. But like I said, there's been some changes in my life recently with finishing up my degree, finishing up my master's, and my teaching credential. Just got hired on a new job that I'm preparing for. So things have been a little crazy lately. A lot is changing right now, but I am back. I'm hoping to produce episodes again. Probably not every week, but hopefully somewhat more consistently than I have been. So we're going to kind of cross that bridge as we get there, and I'll update you guys once I have a more consistent schedule. But for right now, I hope this episode was enjoyable. Hope you guys learned a lot from it. Once again, share it around with your friends and family, both on and offline. If you want to, follow, like, subscribe, share, do all the things that you can do to support me on the podcast here, I definitely appreciate it. But with that, I hope you guys all had a good time with the episode. Hope to catch you all next time. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.